sick.
Good morning, all. Happy Friday. Let me jump to my slides, and in the meanwhile, feel free to ask me questions if you have any related to the course. All right, a few reminders. Quiz 10 is open and is due on Wednesday, March 31st, which is next week. And next week we have April starting, and quiz 11 opens on April 1st, and it's going to be due on Wednesday of the following week, April 7th. So we have a short participation assignment that is due today, and I included some pictures in it, and should be easy, fairly easy to answer. All right, so before moving on to the topic of the next lecture, which is communities and ecosystems, I wanted to state one more concept from the lecture on population. So this slide will relate to the global change impacts, global change biology, the impacts of human population on the environment, basically. So this slide really belongs to the previous lecture on populations, and I just didn't get to it last time. So increasing population has put a strain on Earth's resources. So the map here shows the physical boundaries of countries, and the countries are color-coded from poorest to richest. And this map here shows the ecological footprint of each country. Okay, an ecological footprint is the amount of land people use in everyday life. And you can kind of see that the richer the country is, the larger its ecological footprint. So what do we use land for? You may immediately think like, the land I use is the land that I live on. Like if my apartment is not that big, or if my house is not that big, I don't use a lot of land. But there's a lot of land that you use and you don't see it. So for instance, the food you eat comes from a land, from the land. And the food the food that is consumed in the richest countries, it's kind of requires a lot of land. So apart from the plant food, the like grains that we consume, they require some land. But also we consume a lot of meat, which requires kind of much more land per calorie than plant food. So the richest countries, they consume a lot of meat, they consume a lot of grain. So and vegetables, of course. Because of that, that kind of bloats the ecological footprints of the rich countries. Another type of land use that we don't actually see is the land used for landfills, the land that is used for trash. In some countries, the trash is burned, but in most countries, the trash is deposited on the landfills, and landfills occupy a lot of space, okay? We don't see it, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. So also the land that we use and don't realize it is the land for some sort of production, like oil fields. Oil fields occupy a fair amount of land where there's oil, and the land is virtually uninhabitable, so we cannot really use that land for anything else. So as the takeaway from this slide should be that the human populations do not use resources equally, and the largest countries at the bottom panel of this graph are the richest countries, and those are the countries that use the most land. And just visually compare the actual size of the countries, the actual land area of the countries with the ecological footprints, and kind of it's staggering. And again, the concept to take away from this slide is ecological footprint, which is the amount of land that people use in everyday life. Are there any questions about ecological footprint and what these two maps show, the differences between these two maps? I hope you people have not checked out yet. It's Friday, but it's Friday morning. It's too early to check out. Wait until lunch at least. Okay, so moving on to the next topic within our course, communities and ecosystems. So communities and ecosystems, oh, okay, I see the question in chat from Lauren. So the richer means more ecological footprint, which will lead to the land depleting over time. So yeah, the land, the amount of land that we have is kind of fixed. The land does not really deplete over time. I mean, it's there. The land resources, yes, are depleted over time, but physical land is it's just there. So unless it gets covered by the ocean, it's going to still be there. The soils are getting poorer because of the agriculture. So unless some sustainable agricultural practices are used over time or implemented over time, we are going to have poorer yields. But the modern solution to poorer yields is basically genetic modification of crops to produce higher yields. Okay, not checked out yet. Great. So communities and ecosystems. Community is the level of organization of life that is above the population, okay, and ecosystems is the level organization of life that is above communities. So community is a group of interacting populations, and ecosystem is the community plus the non-living environments, non-living components of the surrounding area. I want to say of the ecosystem, but that's literally the definition of it. So in this picture here, we see a forest, the community that is living within a forest stand. So we have population of trees, the population of understory species, and population of fungi, and many unseen animals and microbes that live in the soil. So each species interacts with the other species in the community, and these kind of interactions are called biotic interactions. And again, biotic means related to something living. So I want to stop at these interactions for a little bit and ask you guys a question. How do you think a fungus interacts with the plants? Like, how could a fungus interact with a tree? Does anybody know anything about the life of fungi? How they are able to exist? They do not photosynthesize. Okay, they're not a plant. They cannot photosynthesize. So where do they get their food from? So Matthew says, aren't they parasitic? There are various types of fungi, but Most of them are, well, some of them are parasitic, some of them are not. This particular one is not parasitic. It has its use. It's interacting with plants somehow. Uh, okay, I really don't know what. I really don't know much, but I think they get their nutrients or food from trees. You are absolutely right, Austin. Uh, the fungi get their nutrients from the trees. They get sugars. So plants photosynthesize, okay, and the sugars produced from photosynthesis, are distributed among the leaves, trunk, stems, and the roots. So the what we don't see here is the below ground part of this fungus, which is pretty extensive. Like it's much, much, much bigger than the above ground part. And the below ground part, it interacts with the roots. The roots supply sugars to the fungus, and that's where it gets its nutrients. But does a tree benefit from fungi at all? So William says, do they consume decamped things? I got nothing. Decompose. They are some of the fungi are decomposers. These guys, they can decompose something. Yes. So you guys are close. Let me scroll up a bit. Uh, okay. So these particular guys, the below ground is interacting with the tree roots. Um, it's getting the sugars from the roots, and it's kind of um, that's how they get nutrients, but they also decompose the dead organic matter. And what they give back to the root are the inorganic nutrients that are necessary for photosynthesis. So, apart from sunlight and carbon dioxide and water that plants need for photosynthesis, plants also need some other nutrients that they get from the soil that they transport to the leaves from the roots. So, within the soil, the roots absorb the inorganic forms of nitrogen and phosphorus, and with water, they transport these inorganic nutrients back to the leaf, and where these nutrients are transformed to enzymes that are needed for photosynthesis to occur. I think I mentioned in this class long, long, long time ago that there's so-called rubisco enzyme, and this rubisco enzyme needs a lot of nitrogen uh, to, uh, to be synthesized. And without this rubisco enzyme, no photosynthesis is going to occur. So what fungi do here is they decompose dead organic matter, in which nitrogen and phosphorus are immobilized, so-called immobilized because plants cannot do anything with the organic forms of nitrogen and phosphorus. So fungi, they decompose, they turn organic forms of nitrogen and phosphorus into inorganic forms. And then these inorganic forms, they're dissolved in the water contained in the soil and transported through the roots, through the stem to the leaves where the necessary enzymes are created so that photosynthesis can occur. So Dylan says fungi create CO2 from O2. Yep, that's right. So when fungi decompose dead organic matter, hold on. CO2 from O2. Oh yeah, right. So fungi contain are made up of cells, and as in any cell, there are going to be some energy processes going on, right? So O2 is needed for energy, and CO2 is produced as a metabolite, as a byproduct. So fungi decompose organic matter. They could like they transform the organic matter in presence of O2 into CO2 plus some inorganic form of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. Okay, hopefully that was clear. And if there are any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. All right. So ecosystems are a level of organization of life that is higher than communities, and ecosystems rely on biotic and abiotic interactions. So the ecosystem pictured here, uh, they they're basically all three are ecosystems. So these ecosystems include plants that absorb inorganic nutrients and harvest energy from the sun. Animals eat the plants, and that's how animals and plants basically interact. And decomposers are a group of organisms that literally decompose dead organic matter, like fungi are decomposers. Decomposers return inorganic nutrients to the soil, and inorganic nutrients again are needed. The example of inorganic nutrients are nitrogen, inorganic forms of nitrogen and phosphorus that are needed for the plants to photosynthesize. So I already went over this example. So plants photosynthesize, they feed fungi with fresh sugar, and this fresh sugar kind of energizes the fungi, and they start eating the surrounding dead organic matter as well, and supplying plants with inorganic forms of nitrogen and phosphorus, so that plants can photosynthesize even more and supply them even more fresh sugar, tasty sugar. Now, eventually, the plants die and they turn from live organic matter to dead organic matter. But the dead organic matter does not stay within the ecosystem for long, because fungi and bacteria and animals that live within the soil, insects that live within the soil, they start decomposing dead organic matter. They start feeding on it and breeding in it and poking holes in it. So over time, this dead organic matter is no more. And it's basically recycled within the ecosystem. So the cool thing to understand about the ecosystem, that often things are not really lost from the ecosystem; they're just recycled. Within this ecosystem, we see some algae. We see a shark that is hunting some prey that lives within the algae. Inorganic components of the ecosystem here include water, light, temperature. Inorganic components in this ecosystem include sunlight, air, the gases that are contained in air, temperature, moisture in the soil, and so on. And then this ecosystem is basically the same components as in these, but different forms, different species of organisms. Now, apart from these three examples are the three examples of the natural ecosystem. The ecosystems are not always natural. We create our own ecosystems, and often the ecosystems that are created by people, the very prominent example of that are farms. Okay, so the ecosystems that are created by people, they often rely on external nutrients. They cannot support themselves. They need external intervention in order to keep existing. So these three ecosystems, they need no external intervention from humans to keep existing. Okay, they're going to do just fine if all humans are gone. But let's say ecosystems like these, they need constant supply of feed and water, constant supply of nutrients and water in order to keep existing. So these kind of things are called controlled animal feeding operations, or CAFO. So there is an extremely high density of just one animal species, and there are no plants within these ecosystems, so there is nothing for them to feed really. So food is brought in from outside of this artificial ecosystem. The animals release a huge amount of organic wastes, like poop, you know, and too much for the local decomposers to handle. So technically, in the floor of this chicken farm here, there is a lot of poop and a lot of dead organic matter. Okay, some remains of feed and so on. And technically, there are bacteria and fungi in there, and they help decompose this organic matter, or turn the organic forms of nutrients into inorganic forms of nutrients, including kind of releasing CO2 into the air and kind of depleting this dead organic matter over time. But there's not enough bacteria or fungi to do it at a fast rate. Or I should say that the rate of input of poop into the system is higher than the rate of decomposition of bacteria and fungi of that poop. Um, so the bottom line is the artificial ecosystem, the natural ecosystems are kind of sustainable, and they don't need external interventions by us to keep existing. They're going to do just fine without us, but artificial ecosystem cannot do just fine without us. They need our constant kind of intervention and constant input of nutrients and constant output of the organic matter, that is unwanted organic matter, um, in order to survive. Speaking of, fun fact about cows, I'm not sure you've heard about it, but just in case you didn't, cow farms emit a huge amount of methane, and the methane comes from cow farts. So this methane is a greenhouse gas, meaning it contributes to the warming of the planet, and it contributes much, much, much more than carbon dioxide, because methane is kind of the heat trapping capacity of methane is like, I want to say like 15 times higher than that of carbon dioxide. So yeah, lots of discussions are going on, like how to alleviate the greenhouse gas of the cow farts. I wonder if they could. It would be cool if they could just trap it and use it for something else. So each species in a community has a unique niche, and niche is the total of all the resources a species requires for its survival, growth, and reproduction. The habitat is one part of the niche. So the niche again is not a physical, not only the physical space where a species lives, but also all the nutrients and all other resources that a species needs for survival. And habitat is just only one part of that. So let's return to this forest ecosystem here, and let's think about plants. Like what kind of resources do plants need again to survive? Feel free to unmute yourself and just talk. Analysis: water, sun, excellent. What else? Soil, nice, huh? So soil provides kind of, it allows plants to anchor themselves with roots. It provides inorganic nutrients. It provides, what else does soil provide? Dylan says CO2, great. Yep, O2, yes. What else does soil provide? Inorganic matter, inorganic nutrients, yes, but anything else that a plant needs to survive apart from CO2, sunlight, oxygen? Oh, and also got it, water. That's what I was going for. Okay, great. We've got it. So moving on. Let's talk about the abiotic components of the ecosystems for a bit, particularly the abiotic components that are temperature and moisture conditions. The temperature and moisture conditions are often characterized by climate types. And climatic conditions, they basically shape ecosystems. They affect species distribution and abundance across the globe. And since climates exert such a huge effect on the species composition and abundance and the type of species that would be able to exist in a particular ecosystem, I want to talk a little bit about why climates differ. Okay, and technically the definition of the climate is often confused with weather, and they are different, and the root of their difference is in how, basically the length of time that a weather persists, okay, or long-term patterns of the weather. So climate is the basically prevailing long-term weather patterns, whereas weather is just short-term temperature and moisture conditions. So what shapes the climate? First thing that shapes the climate is basically Earth's curvature. And so Earth is not, it has this ellipsoid shape, it's shown as round here, but it's not round. So imagine that the Earth would be smushed at the poles here, at the North and South Pole, so smushed vertically. And this is going to be a more, this is kind of actually a better shape representation than this. So, uneven distribution of sunlight across Earth's surface explains why temperature falls with distance from the equator. So, in the equator, right here, right in the middle of Earth, okay, the sun rays hit the Earth more directly than at the poles. And because the sunlight hit the Earth at a more direct angle, they kind of bring more energy, they deliver more energy in these regions. Whereas these regions right here, they get less energy from the sunlight because the rays do not hit the surface, land surface directly, but at a more oblique angle. And this picture here shows the temperature gradient, to ocean temperature distribution across the globe. So red indicates warmer temperatures and blue indicates colder temperatures. So we see that at the equator, ocean is very, very warm and it becomes cooler as you move towards the poles. Okay, so does it make sense that temperatures decrease as you move away from the equator, from the pole, because of the angle at which sunlight hits the land surface or ocean surface, Earth's surface? Yes, great. And a second thing that influences Earth's climate is the the way that the Earth travels around the sun and Earth's tilt compared to just 90-degree angle. So the Earth is kind of tilted. It's tilted at 23.5 degrees from a vertical axis. And because of this tilt, we have the seasons in the North Hemisphere and the South Hemisphere. So whenever Earth rotates around the sun, because of the tilt, sometimes the southern portion gets more sunlight than the northern portion, and sometimes northern portion of the globe gets more sunlight compared to the southern portion. So whenever sunlight hits the northern portion more directly, we get summer in the northern hemisphere. And in Florida, it's not as kind of, you cannot feel it as much, but as you move closer to the North Pole, you kind of feel the effects of it. The effects are getting more drastic. In fact, above the polar circle, the sun really never sets in the summer, like particularly in June. Like you have a lot of people have trouble going to bed because it's always daylight in June and in July. But the opposite of that comes in the winter, where there's always nighttime. So what happens in the winter? In the winter, the southern portion of the southern hemisphere of Earth is getting more sunlight because of this 23.5-degree tilt, and the northern portion does not get sunlight as much. And in the northern pole, there's a polar night going on in December where sun doesn't come up at all. It's just either twilight conditions or completely dark conditions. Okay, is it confusing? Like, does it make sense why the Earth's tilt causes the seasons in the northern and southern hemisphere? So the seasons are basically caused by the Earth's rotation around the sun and the tilt. And the tilt kind of determines this, the tilt of the Earth is the cause why there is seasonality, why winter and summer are the opposites in the northern and southern hemisphere. All right, and another thing that influences the climate is the air circulation patterns. So air circulation patterns are pretty cool. They're described by these arrows in the various portions of the globe, and these circles here, the circulation of air here is also called a convection cell, and there are a total of six big convection cells around the Earth. So at the equator, why those convection cells, kind of how do they work, is the basic underlying mechanism is that warm air rises and cool air is more dense and it is falling down. Okay, so warm air is kind of less dense and it wants to rise up, and once it rises up it cools down and eventually falls to the ground somewhere else. So at the equator we have very lush vegetation, and it's also very warm. So this very lush vegetation, it kind of it needs water to survive, and the water is pulled from the soil. Okay, eventually the water is pulled to the leaves and it evaporates into the atmosphere. So the evaporated water, the warm air, kind of carries the water. And it rises to the sky. Okay, and once the water, the warm air with the full of water rises to higher elevations, it the air cools down, the water condenses, and it falls back to along the equator as rainfall. Now this dry air, it's kind of this continues to cool down, and eventually it falls back to the ground in around 30 degrees latitude, uh, north and south. And once it falls down, it gathers moisture from the land surface and travels back to the area, to the warm area, to the equator in this particular example. So this where is more moist, and eventually it gets back to tropics where there's lush vegetation, lots of evaporation and evapotranspiration going on, and the cycle repeats again. Okay, so because the air that travels to the 30 degrees latitude north and south, it's it's dry and it's cold, it's cooler. The most of the deserts occur at 30 around 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south, because there's not enough moisture to support the lush vegetation here, but all the moisture is basically left in the tropical regions. Similar thing is going on in the temperate regions, like around 60 degrees north. It's not a, I wouldn't say 60, I would say 50 degrees north is where the same process is going on. Like there's lush vegetation in the temperate regions, and the same thing happens. Water evaporates, and water evaporates from the land surface, and evaporation from the plants is called transpiration. And the process of evaporation and transpiration is called basically often referred to evapotranspiration. So there's a lot of evapotranspiration going on in the temperate regions, and the warm air rises, moisture condenses, rainfall falls back into temperate regions, and the dry air travels to northern latitudes like 90 to 90 degrees north and 90 degrees south, and that is why we have Arctic deserts. Okay, the areas around the globe that do not get a lot of rainfall, do not get a lot of moisture, and are very, very cold. Okay, movement of air, and the reason why we have lush vegetation in the tropical forests. Is it clearing up? Does it make sense how air movement, how the convection cells work? And if it does not make sense, please ask questions about it. Okay. So another thing that influences climate are ocean currents. We have around the globe, we have warm ocean currents and the cold ocean currents. Around the along the east coast of the U.S., we have very nice warm ocean currents, and uh, they warm air can which results from the warm ocean currents. It holds more water, and it's able to deposit larger amount of precipitation, and this is basically the reason why there are lush forests along the eastern side of the US. The cold ocean currents are not as efficient at depositing, basically at carrying moisture, and well, they're technically ocean currents, but what I'm talking about is the air above those currents. So if the ocean current is warm, the air above it will also be warm, and if the ocean current is cold, the air above it will also be cold. So the warm air above ocean currents carries more rainfall compared to the air above cold ocean currents. And this warm air above warm ocean currents is the reason why we have lush forests in the eastern United States. Okay. And the cold currents are often because the air above cold currents is also colder. It's not able. It's not as efficient as at carrying moisture and kind of causing rainfall in the neighboring areas. So often the land areas that kind of are close to cold ocean currents, they are covered by deserts. So there is a desert over here. There's lots of deserts over here, and the reason behind that is because kind of lack of rainfall. Lack of rainfall. Okay. So Anel says, is this why we have hurricanes over here? Unfortunately, yeah. So, and in fact, we have more intense hurricanes because ocean is becoming warmer, and again, warmer air around the ocean currents, it's more efficient and it carries even more moisture. So we have like more rainfall, and the air circulation patterns are getting more extreme as well. And Christine says, this is bringing me back to middle school. Oh, good. So this is all familiar. I'll move faster then. So another thing that influences climate, another factor that influences climate is elevation or mountains. So as you go up the mountain, and I hope every one of you have done that or will do it in the future, as you go up the mountain, the temperatures become colder. And you often can see how vegetation changes as you go up the mountain. You may, at the foot of the mountain, you may have a forest, but as you go to up the mountain, at the very top, you may have like alpine sort of vegetation. You may have grasses growing and no trees anymore. And this is because the grasses can survive more efficiently in the colder climates, and trees just don't make it there. It may be too cold for trees. And in fact, if you've flown over mountains or or traveled to mountains in the summer, in some mountains you can see snow caps, and that is because it's cold enough at the top of that mountain to support year-round snow. Apart from temperature, mountains play a huge role in rainfall distribution. So as the air masses with holding a lot of moisture, as the air masses travel around through the mountains, lots of rain is basically deposited at one side of the mountain. And if all of the rain is deposited at one side of the mountain, once the air masses cross the mountains and move forward, they will not contain moisture at all. So often at one side of the mountains there is lush vegetation, and on the other side there is desert, because all of the rainfall was kind of stopped at one side of the mountain. All the air lost all the moisture, and nothing was left for the other side of the mountain. So an example where that happens is basically this area in Chile. Warm air masses full of moisture kind of travel from here, from the ocean, and all of the rainfall is deposited on the, what is this, western side of the mountain, and nothing is left for the eastern, and that is why there is desert over here. So biomes, let's move to biomes. So climate shapes, again, climate shapes the distribution. Climate shapes the kind of species of animals and plants that are able to exist in the area. And basically, these groups of species have been classified into biomes. And biomes are often characterized by the not only by by the species that are distributed in them, but also by climates that are experienced by those biomes. So biomes, technically, the definition for those are ecosystems with distinctive communities of life. Ecologists divide the biosphere into biomes, and each biome is characterized by a distinctive group of species. So we have forest biome, desert biome, grassland biome. Are all these are example of terrestrial biomes or land biomes, and we also have aquatic biomes or water-based ecosystems, and they're characterized by lakes, streams, and oceans. So, and again, climate dictates the distribution of biomes. And to give you a visual, like which biomes are distributed in which locations, in which climatic envelopes, let's take a look at this graph. On x-axis here, there is average temperature or average annual temperature, average yearly temperature, and on y-axis there is precipitation. So in the areas with high temperature and high precipitation or high rainfall, we have tropical rainforest. And this is kind of called, this shape of the figure here, of the dark green area here, is called the climatic envelope for the particular biome. So temperate forests, they tend to be distributed in the colder temperatures, but still in the high precipitation areas. Tropical dry forests have the same temperature as tropical rainforest, but they have less rainfall compared to tropical rainforest. As we move down the rainfall gradient, meaning as rainfall is getting smaller, we move into savannas. So savannas are pretty hot, but they have less rainfall than tropical rainforest and tropical dry forest. Chaparral has even less rainfall than savanna, and it's basically drier, but it's still hot. And deserts are are biomes that are characterized by very low moisture, very low annual rainfall, and temperatures can range a large, can span a large. Temperatures can vary widely in the deserts. Okay, there are deserts in the hot areas as well as deserts in the cold areas. So basically, the takeaway from this should be that deserts are biomes where rainfall is low. And if there's no rainfall, it basically very little plants can survive in low rainfall conditions. And another takeaway from this graph should be that as the rainfall increases, as the annual rainfall in the area increases, the more trees there are, the more trees there can survive in the area. So, what other ecosystems we have? So we have forests in the more colder regions. In the colder regions, we have temperate rainforest, which is located. We have temperate rainforest in the United States, and it's located along the Pacific coast. We have lots of temperate forests, and they're very beautiful. Like if uh, what I've lived in Nashville for a while, and they have beautiful forests. They're beautiful nature. Temperate grasslands, we have lots of those as well. Well, we used to. Now it's most of it is croplands. Taiga, we don't have taiga because we do not, in the United States, there's no temperatures cold enough to support the taiga kind of vegetations. So taiga is distributed across the boreal regions of Canada, and they are characterized by the trees there are not that lush. Like the stems of trees are not very wide. They can be like this. Oh, you can probably cannot see the camera, but the diameter of stems can be I don't know, like 10 centimeters, which is divided by three, you'll get inches. And those small trees could have lived there for 150 years. So the growth rates are pretty low, but yeah, but they're still there and they're still forests. And tundras are kind of have the shrubby vegetation and grassy vegetation. And finally, like there's this Arctic ice conditions. Like no, it is basically too cold in on ice for anything to survive. Ice never melts, so plants cannot survive there. Some mosses do, but not plants. It's the mosses are not enough to support much animal diversity. Okay, I'm gonna take a look at the chat here. Does anyone live in Antarctica? I wonder. Huh. Uh, yes, there people do live in Antarctica. In fact, there are several scientific station, what is called research stations, research hubs in Antarctica, and basically they people there rely on semi-annual shipments of food and I believe water as well, and the conditions are pretty rough. I mean, it's first of all, it's dark half of the year, okay, and it's not very nice to live there in the darkness. Second of all, it's pretty cold, not all the time, but it's uncomfortable. It is dangerously cold for half of the year. And thirdly, there are snow snow hurricanes. So the wind speeds can get pretty high in these snowstorms. Like the wind speeds can be hurricane grade, but instead of rain, they're getting snow. So a lot of times, even if like they live in the special housing, right? And even if the doors are shut, the wind speeds are so high that the snow would blow directly into through the little cracks in the door, microscopic cracks in the door. Ba-bum. What else is there in the chat? Is the graph with the fire icon saying that drier we get, the more likely a fire will start, or is it just saying that it's extremely hot in those places? So the fire icon, good question, Lauren. The fire icon here indicates that fire is the natural part of the ecosystem. Okay, so in savannas, chaparrals, and temperate grasslands, they burn periodically, and it's normal because the function of fire is basically turn organic matter into inorganic matter. So after fire, there's a lot of nutrients, a lot of inorganic forms of nitrogen and phosphorus. And after fire, the grasslands kind of sprout, recover very quickly, even within the same year. And the vegetation that sprouts from after fire is basically it's looking better compared to vegetation that was there before. Like it's healthier because there's more nutrients available for photosynthesis to occur, basically. And same goes for savannas and chaparral. Another function, ecological function of fire in these ecosystems is to basically destroy the saplings of trees. And because of fire, temperate grasslands do not turn into temperate forests, because in some regions of grasslands, there could be forests or there could be more shrubs, but there are not, and that is because of the fire. Trees have harder time to recover from fire than grasses, and that is why like temperate grassland stays temperate grassland. Same for savanna and chaparral. Okay. It also says, so I can't live with them. You could. I mean, you could go into the area of research that is done on Antarctica, which is lots of geological kind of research is done in Antarctica, and you could be a staff psychologist maybe, or well, clinical psychologist to kind of work consulting. There's a great demand for there because of the social isolation, which I'm sure all of us experienced over the past year, and you can kind of appreciate how difficult it is to be isolated for a year. And people are isolated there for sometimes more than 1 year. Okay, so clinical psychologists, I would guess, are in demand. Are there any questions about this graph, about the biome distribution and how basically how taiga would differ from, I don't know, tropical dry forest. Like, does it make sense to you guys, this plotting of the biomes within the climate envelopes? Okay, so let me ask you this question: if if suddenly in the area of the temperate grassland it starts raining more due to climate change, what's going to happen? Does an ecosystem, would this biome change into anything else over time? So let's say there used to be 100 centimeters a year of rainfall, and over time, suddenly, well, not suddenly, over time, the new type of rainfall, the new amount of rainfall that would fall annually would be 200 centimeters within a grassland. Like after 100 years, what kind of biome do you think would it be? Would it turn into? Matthew says it would become a temperate forest. Excellent. Lauren says temperate forest. Excellent. Yes, exactly right. So, like, um, in this particular question, the rainfall used to be 100 centimeters, and I said it would become 200 centimeters. I didn't say the temperature would change, so technically, it would turn into temperate forest. Now, if the temperatures became warmer, like let's say the temperatures used to be 10 degrees Celsius, but if the temperatures became warmer and the rainfall became like rainfall increased by 100 centimeters, we would move on the graph over here. So if I asked you what would happen with the temperate grassland over time if the temperature increased to 20 degrees Celsius and the rainfall increased to 200 centimeters per year, you would move to this area of the graph. You would look up in the graph what biome would have temperatures of 20 degrees Celsius and 200 centimeters, and it would be tropical dry forest. Yeah, good. So it's 10:20. I'll end here and pick it up on Monday. Are there any last minute questions, guys?
I was
Hans
gonna,
says, go ahead,
more of
Dylan.
a statement. I was going to use the map, but doesn't that mean Florida is a dry, tropical, whatever? Like, is that what we are?
Ooh, I'm not sure what are Florida conditions.
I mean,
Uh,
I know it changes because I used to live in South Florida, and it's like, it's like 8 to 10 degrees, kind of warmer down there.
yeah, Central Florida, I would put it a dry tropical forest, but it would be on the cusp between wet tropical and dry tropical.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's what I thought.
Hung, to answer your question, yes, this graph will be given in the exam. And there's also a question about it in today's participation exercise to kind of practice your understanding. Any other questions? All right, guys, have a good weekend, and I'll see